Hello and welcome to this first look at A.K. Warder's Introduction to Pali. You have to admit that the Pali Tech Society has the most exciting book covers. Well, that said, Warder's Intro to Pali is the go-to grammar guide for serious students of the Pali language, the language of the Theravada Buddhist canon. This is the first in hopefully a long series of tutorials where I will explain, chapter by chapter, the concepts that I found most difficult. And so they're intended as a companion guide rather than a direct replacement. And there's a link below in the description to a freely available PDF copy. If you're new to Pali, it's probably best starting with the introductory tutorial series appearing above now. So today we're going to start with the introductory chapter of Warder, that is pages 1 through 9, and you'll need to be referring to that for this series of tutorials to make any sense. This is Pali Studies on the Learn Pali channel. Though short, the introductory chapter actually covers a lot of linguistic theory, dealing first with the phonetics of the alphabet, and then moving on to the morphology of words and finally some syntax. So let's dive straight in with section 1, the alphabet. Pali is a phonetic language, meaning that each speech sound is represented by one letter, and thus each letter represents one and only one sound. This has some interesting consequences. Speech is a phonetic continuum without pauses between words and only between clauses. So traditionally, Pali was written as one continuous string of sounds, like it was spoken with no gaps between the individual words. The words would have been obvious to a native speaker, but now they're only separable by grammatical analysis, as certain sounds can't appear next to each other within a word. Another issue is that of dialect. As speech would have naturally varied across regions, just which speech sounds do you choose to be correct? Well, this has led to the fact that the Pali language that we have today has many alternative spellings. As Pali doesn't have a written script of its own, for centuries Pali scholars have relied on their own native alphabets in order to write it down. Thus the Theravada Buddhist canon has been written down in a number of scripts: Sinhalese, Burmese, Khmer and Thai, for instance, and these in turn were derived from the Brahmi script of India. In the West, the Roman alphabet too has been adapted and enlarged, often through the use of diacritic marks, those funny-looking glyphs around letters. Now, I've covered the Pali alphabet in some detail in a previous tutorial, so briefly here, Pali has both long and short vowels, as well as a nasalization character called the Nigahita, which is only applied to short vowels. In Indian-based scripts, this is usually just a simple dot or a small circle placed by the vowel, but in the Roman script it's represented by a separate character. Now, the ancient Indian grammarians classified the letters, or rather the sounds that they represent, according to where those sounds are made in the mouth. And the progression moves from the back of the mouth, with the gutturals, towards the front. Now note, modern linguistics prefers the term velar for guttural and retroflex for cerebral. Moving on now to the second section, the sentence. In this section, Warder details quite a few technical linguistic terms. The study of any language can be split into the syntax, how words are combined into sentences, such as subject, verb, object, and morphology, that is, the study of the words themselves, how they can be split into smaller units, called morphemes. And together, these fields are called grammar. Now, morphemes are the building blocks from which words are made, and from the point of view of their function, we can divide them into three classes: the root, which carries the basic meaning of the word, and affixes, which in turn can be divided into derivational, those which alter the meaning of the word, in effect creating a new word, and inflectional affixes, which place grammatical meaning, like plurality, onto the words. Now, roots may not always be whole words, and this is especially true in Pali, and so they require the addition of derivational affixes in order to make sense. And this brings us to the term base. Strictly, a base is two or more morphemes to which additional morphemes may be added, but generally it's used to mean anything to which affixes can be attached. And another characteristic of the derivational morpheme is that they tend to convert the word from one category of speech to another. Now, English traditionally has 8 parts of speech. These can be divided into the major parts, which are content words, and minor parts, which are functional words. Now, inflectional morphemes don't create new words. Instead, they mark the word for grammatical categories. So, in English, nouns can be marked for plurality, possession, which is a type of case, and we'll come on to that in later tutorials, and verbs can be marked for person, as in the third person s, the past tense, and also the past and the present participles. But English is a very lightly inflected language. Pali, however, is a highly inflected language. This means that the endings of most of its words change depending on their grammatical function in the sentence. Consequently, one of the most important aspects of translating Pali is examining and identifying these affixes in order to get at the grammatical meaning. Now, inflectional affixes applied to nouns in Pali indicate number, case, and also gender. And the inflection of nouns is generally termed declension, whereas verbs are marked for number, person, tense and mood, as well as voice, and generally the inflection of verbs is termed conjugation, though I should point out that Warder follows the ancient Pali grammarians and uses the term conjugation in a specialised way, but more on that later. So, if we take a particular word in Pali, we can fill out a table of all the forms we find of that word, and this is called a paradigm. And so we can see that nouns are inflected according to 8 different case endings, and Warder presents these gradually throughout the book. In fact, it's not only the endings of nouns that vary according to case, but also those of adjectives and pronouns too. And we can do the same for verbs, where we find that the endings vary according to person. Now, if we extract the common denominator from these tables, this is called a stem, whilst Warder tends to call the inflectional morphemes endings. So the stem is a word form without any inflectional endings. Dictionaries tend to list nouns in this stem form, however verbs are usually listed in their third person singular. In fact, the ancient grammarians analysed the Pali language based on these common inflection patterns, and arrived at 4 parts of speech: those that decline like nouns, which include adjectives and pronouns, those that inflect like verbs, a set of prefixes which are actually derivational morphemes, and a group of words which showed no change in form, and these are termed indeclinables. Now finally, Warder presents a short section on syntax. Here we can see how the inflectional endings are used to determine the grammatical features of the sentence. So, in an inflected language like Pali, the subject of the verb is expressed in the nominative case, whilst the object is expressed in the accusative case. Note that Warder here uses the semantic terms agent for subject and patient for the object, and the verb is made to agree in both person and number with the subject. Now, where English relies on word order, because in Pali the grammatical function of each word is clear due to the inflectional markings, it's possible for the words to appear in any order without loss of meaning, although very generally the word order in Pali is subject, object, verb. And if we now look at another example, this is a type of equational sentence or simple attribution. The boy is a monk. This is equating the boy to being a monk. Notice in Pali there's usually nothing to express the indefinite and definite articles, that is, the and a or an in English, so we have to add them when translating. Now it's very common in Pali not to express the verb in this type of attribution, and if so, the attribute is also placed in the nominative case and follows its subject.
So for instance, in this Pali sentence, we have 6 substantive nouns and no verbs at all. Now each of the nouns are in nominative singular, and we can see that they form pairs. And from this we can infer that they're actually equational phrases, the 2 nouns being linked by an implied is. So we can translate this as action is the field, awareness is the seed, and thirst is the sap. This type of construction is sometimes referred to as a nominal sentence, nominal meaning that it's composed of nouns and that there are no verbs. Now this only happens in Pali when the verb is a form of to be, and in the present tense that is, and also only when nouns are in nominative case.
Well, that about wraps up the introductory chapter of Warder's Introduction to Pali. As I said, this was designed to be more of a companion rather than a straight walkthrough. If you want more of a detailed walkthrough, I've put a link down in the description below to Ajahn Brahmali's course over on the Wisdom and Wonders website. And of course there are more introductory tutorials on my channel. Well, thank you for watching, and hopefully next week we'll go through Chapter 1.